of everybody you raced with, who was your greatest rival of all time?
You know, Parnelli Jones was really tough on the banks, but a lot of people were so much better on certain racetracks. But the high banks, he had that Chevrolet V8 and I had a little 220 off it, so he kind of had a little advantage. But Parnelli was a hell of a race driver. Well, that's a question I've heard for a long, long time, and I understand why people ask it. Racing fans love rivalries. They remember Indianapolis. They remember the close finishes. They remember the championships. But over the years, another question started coming up more and more. AJ, who were the 5 greatest IndyCar drivers you ever raced against? Now, that's a much harder one to answer, because greatness isn't always measured by how many races a man won. It isn't always measured by championships either. Sometimes it's about the driver who made you think the hardest, the one who forced you to find another 1/10 of a second, the one who made you respect every lap because you knew one little mistake was all he needed. I raced against a lot of remarkable drivers. Some were fearless. Some were unbelievably smooth. Some could understand a race better than anyone else on the grid. Every one of them challenged me in a different way. But when I look back today, there are 5 men who left the deepest impression on me. They made me a better race driver, and that's why I'll always remember them. Now, I've got to start with Mario, because if we're talking about the greatest drivers I ever raced against, his name has to be near the top. I first got to know Mario back in the 1960s. Even then, you could tell he was different. Some drivers belonged on one kind of racetrack. Mario didn't. You could take him to a dirt oval, a paved oval, a road course. It didn't seem to matter. Sooner or later, he'd figure it out. And once he figured it out, you had a problem. What made Mario so difficult was never just speed. Believe me, there were plenty of fast drivers in those days. Every weekend, somebody could put together one incredible qualifying lap. But Mario could do something a lot harder. He could stay fast, lap after lap, hour after hour. He understood how a race developed. He knew when to push. He knew when to take care of the tires. He knew when to stay patient. That's something statistics never really show. Another thing I always respected was how well he understood a race car. He could tell his crew exactly what the car needed, not just that something felt wrong. He could explain why. That kind of feedback made the whole team better. And when the team got the setup right, beating Mario became one of the toughest jobs in the paddock. I remember watching him through the late 1960s. Every season, he seemed to become a more complete driver. Then came Indianapolis in 1969. When Mario finally won the 500, nobody was surprised, if anything. And most of us felt he should have won one sooner. He had been fast there for years. That victory simply confirmed what everybody already believed. Outside the cockpit, Mario carried himself with confidence. Some people misunderstood that. I never did. The best drivers have to believe they're the best. Otherwise, this sport will beat you before the green flag even drops. Mario believed in himself. Then he went out and proved it whenever I knew he was in the race. I also knew there wouldn't be many easy laps. If your car was just a little off, he'd find the advantage. If your crew made a mistake in the pits, he'd take it. If you hesitated trying to pass traffic, he was already thinking 2 or 3 corners ahead. That's what made him special. Looking back now, I don't remember every finish. I don't remember every trophy. But I do remember how hard I had to work every time Mario Andretti showed up. He pushed me. He pushed everybody. And whether you beat him or he beat you, you always drove home knowing you just raced against one of the very best. Now, this one was different. Al Unser never tried to impress anybody. He didn't have to. The first time you raced against Al, you noticed something almost immediately. He never looked like he was forcing the car. Everything was smooth. Everything looked under control. Sometimes you'd think he wasn't even pushing. Then you'd look at the timing sheet, and somehow he was right there. That's what made him dangerous. What made Al so difficult was never spectacular qualifying speed. It was consistency. He could run the same pace for hundreds of miles, lap after lap. He almost never abused the tires. He almost never put unnecessary stress on the engine. He understood that the Indianapolis 500 wasn't won in the first 100 miles. It was won by still having a fast race car when everyone else had started making mistakes. I respected that. A lot of drivers wanted to lead every lap. Al didn't seem to care about that. He cared about leading the last one. That takes discipline. It also takes confidence. The 1970 season proved exactly what kind of driver he was. Al won Indianapolis that year, and he didn't do it by taking wild chances. He let the race come to him. When opportunities appeared, he took them. When patience was the better choice, he waited. That was his style. And it worked. We raced against each other for years after that. Every time I saw the Unser car in the field, I knew we were in for a long afternoon. Because you couldn't count on Al making the mistake that would hand you the race. If you wanted to beat him, you had to earn it. There were days when my car felt stronger. There were days when his did. But no matter what either of us was driving, I never expected an easy battle. Outside the cockpit, Al was a quiet man. He wasn't interested in creating headlines. He let his driving speak for him. I've always respected people like that. In this sport, there's plenty of noise. There are always opinions, always predictions. Al ignored all of it. He focused on the job. Looking back now, I think that's one of the biggest reasons he stayed successful for so many years. He understood that winning wasn't about proving something every single lap. It was about making the right decisions over the entire race. Racing against Al taught me that patience can be every bit as powerful as aggression. Sometimes the smartest driver isn't the one who looks the fastest. Sometimes he's the one who's still there when the checkered flag falls. And Al Unser was almost always still there. Then there was Gordon Johncock. Gordon was the kind of driver you never underestimated. You couldn't. If you did, he'd remind you before the race was over. The first thing that stood out about Gordon was how calm he stayed. He didn't waste energy trying to intimidate anybody. He wasn't interested in being the loudest guy in the garage. He just climbed into the car, put his helmet on, and went to work. What made Gordon so difficult was his toughness, not just physically, mentally. There were drivers who looked unbeatable when everything was going their way. Gordon was different. Sometimes he was at his best when things weren't going his way at all. He had an incredible ability to stay focused, even when a race became chaotic. Long caution periods, changing track conditions, mechanical problems, none of it seemed to rattle him. That made him one of the smartest competitors I ever faced. I remember how strong he became throughout the 1970s, especially at Indianapolis. Everybody remembers his victory there in 1973. That race was one of the toughest Indianapolis 500s ever run. The weather kept changing. The race was stopped and restarted several times. It tested everybody's patience. When it was finally over, Gordon had earned every bit of that victory. A few years later, he proved it wasn't a fluke. He won Indianapolis again in 1979. You don't win that race twice by accident. You have to understand the place. You have to respect it. And Gordon certainly did. Whenever we raced together, I knew I couldn't relax. Even if I had a faster car early in the afternoon. Even if I had track position. Because Gordon had a way of staying close. He never made you feel comfortable. He kept the pressure on until the very end. That's something every great race driver knows how to do. He forced you to stay perfect. One small mistake, one slow pit stop, one bad restart. That was all he needed. Outside the race car, Gordon wasn't looking for attention. He let other people do the talking. His driving said enough. I've always admired competitors like that. They don't need headlines. They don't need excuses. They simply show up and perform. Looking back now, I think Gordon represented something that's becoming harder to find. Quiet determination, no drama, no distractions, just complete commitment to doing the job better than everyone else. Racing against him reminded me that championships aren't won by emotion. They're won by discipline. And Gordon Johncock had plenty of that. Every time we shared the same racetrack, I knew I had to earn every inch. That's why I'll always remember him. And then there was Johnny Rutherford. Johnny had one of the smoothest driving styles I'd ever seen. Some drivers looked like they were wrestling the race car every lap. Johnny never did. From the outside, it almost looked effortless. That could fool people. They'd think he wasn't pushing. Trust me, he just had a way of making a very difficult job look simple. What made Johnny so dangerous was how cleanly he managed a race. He never seemed to waste motion. He never asked more from the car than it was willing to give. That meant his equipment usually lasted. His tires stayed underneath him. And when the race reached the final stages, he always seemed to have something left. That's a skill that doesn't get enough credit. Anybody can drive flat out for 10 laps. The great ones know how to drive 500 miles. Johnny understood that better than most. His Indianapolis victories proved it. He finally broke through in 1974. Then he came back and won again in 1976. A few years later, he added a third victory in 1980. You don't accomplish that without understanding every inch of that speedway. Indianapolis rewards patience. It rewards precision. Johnny had both. I always knew that if he was still running near the front late in the afternoon, the race wasn't over. He was one of those drivers who became more dangerous as the laps disappeared. He never panicked. He didn't force impossible passes. He waited until the opportunity was real. Then he took it. That's harder than most people realize. As race drivers, we all fight the temptation to do too much. Johnny knew exactly when not to. I admired that. Off the track, Johnny was easy to get along with. He enjoyed racing. He enjoyed people. But once the visor came down, all of that disappeared. He became completely focused. That's the version of Johnny every competitor respected. Looking back now, I think people sometimes underestimate just how complete he really was. They remember the Indianapolis wins. They remember the smile. But those of us who raced against him remember something else. We remember how incredibly difficult he was to beat because he almost never gave you a free opportunity. If you finished ahead of Johnny Rutherford, you knew you'd earned it. That's the kind of respect drivers have for one another. Not because of what people write, not because of trophies, but because we know exactly how hard it is to beat someone who almost never beats himself. The last man I want to talk about is Parnelli Jones. You heard me mention his name earlier. There's a reason for that. When people ask me about the toughest rivals I ever had, Parnelli always comes to mind. He was one of those drivers who made you pay attention the moment he rolled the car onto the track. What made Parnelli so difficult was his fearlessness. Now, every driver in our sport had courage. You couldn't survive without it. But Parnelli had another level, especially on the high-banked ovals. He trusted the car completely. More importantly, he trusted himself. There were times I'd watch him drive into a corner and think, there's no way he's going to make that. Then he'd come out the other side without lifting. That's the kind of confidence you can't teach. You either have it or you don't. Back in the early 1960s, we had some tremendous battles. The competition in USAC was fierce. Every weekend felt like a heavyweight fight. Nobody gave you anything, and Parnelli certainly didn't. His victory at Indianapolis in 1963 showed exactly who he was. He had the speed, he had the nerve, and he handled the pressure that comes with leading the biggest race in America. Everybody in the garage respected that. I know I did. There were races when I thought I had everything under control. Then I'd look in the mirror. There was Parnelli still there, still pushing, still looking for one opportunity. That's what made racing against him exhausting. You couldn't relax, not for one lap. Off the track, we competed hard. On the track, we competed even harder. But there was always respect between us because we both understood what it took to race these machines. People sometimes think rivalries are built on dislike. Most of the time, they're built on respect. You respect someone because you know how difficult they are to beat. That's exactly how I felt about Parnelli. Looking back now, I don't remember every position we finished. I don't remember every trophy sitting on a shelf. What I remember is the challenge. I remember knowing that if I wanted to beat Parnelli Jones, I couldn't leave anything in reserve. I had to drive at my absolute best. That's all you can ask from a competitor. The greatest rivals don't just test your race car. They test your character. Parnelli did that every single time we raced. And because of that, he helped make me a better driver than I ever would have become on my own. You know, after all these years, I've realized something. People remember the winners. They remember the headlines. They remember who drank the milk at Indianapolis. That's only part of the story. The part I remember is the competition, because no driver becomes great by racing against ordinary competition. You become better because somebody out there keeps pushing you beyond what you thought was possible. Mario Andretti challenged me with his versatility. Unser showed me the value of patience. Gordon Johncock reminded me that toughness isn't always loud. Johnny Rutherford proved that smooth can be just as fast as aggressive. And Parnelli Jones showed me what absolute commitment behind the wheel really looked like. Every one of those men made me a better race driver. More importantly, they made me a better competitor. The trophies are wonderful. The victories mean a lot, but time has a funny way of changing what matters. Today, I don't think about the cars as much. I think about the people who climbed into those cars beside me, the men who accepted the same risks, the men who understood exactly what it felt like to chase one more lap, one more pass, one more chance to win. I'm grateful I had the opportunity to race against them, because if your rivals make you raise your own standard, they're doing you the greatest favor they'll ever know. And when I look back on my career today, that's what stays with me the most.